Brothers and sisters. Well, brothers and sisters, if your heart's not warm after you've heard this, then you're not a Christadelphian. These three chapters, 12, 13 and 14, are set apart in this book of the Bible quite singularly with this statement. Here it is here. It appears 16 times in these three chapters. In that day. I'll just get started off with what's going to happen in that day, brothers and sisters. And we live on the very verge of that. Believe me, you know that. I couldn't stress that more. This is the most exciting thing. This is our day. And 16 times in these last three chapters, we've got that statement. Now, here's what's going to happen in that day. Just look at the summary. God will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone. We are the living witnesses of that. We don't have to be told that that's a prophecy that'll be fulfilled in the future. We are the people that during the course of our life over many years have stood on this earth and watched that happen time and time and time again. We've seen that, haven't we? We are the witnesses of it. The Bible is true. He will confuse the invading armies against that city. He will strengthen the Jewish defenders. This is all in that day. When that phrase appears, this is what it says is going to happen. He will protect the feeble. He will destroy the nations attacking Jerusalem. Israel as he whom they crucified and publicly mourned for him because of their rejection of him. God will inaugurate a process of moral cleansing. He will abolish idolatry throughout the land. He will humble the teachers that led Israel astray. We find in that first verse the description of the early success of the invaders. Then the appearance of Christ that triggers a massive earthquake that is felt throughout the world. The whole world is going to be shaken, brothers and sisters. The whole world is going to be shaken to the ground when that earthquake happens. It's an incredible thing. I've been extremely excited with these. I've done them all before, but I've never failed to be excited by these chapters. This is all that's going to happen very shortly. The nations are going to be unaware as yet as to who is this formidable opponent. Who is this tremendous opponent? They don't know at this stage, Zechariah says it. And the confused nations turn on one another because they are totally confused about who and who isn't on their side. The victory for Christ and the saints sees the holiness of Yahweh begin to pervade the whole city. The whole city. To the kitchen, to the most holy place. From the kitchen to the most holy place, brothers and sisters, outside on the bells and the bridles of horses. The holiness of Yahweh will pervade the whole circumstance, the whole area of Jerusalem. It'll be everywhere. It'll be a new world, brothers and sisters. And from all unbelievers will be excluded from that city. If you don't believe, you're not in there. All unbelievers get out because the holiness of Yahweh pervading that city, it becomes, of course, absolutely impossible that anything other than that could live there. And everything is excluded out of that city. And, of course, we have this grand and glorious statement. And Yahweh shall be king over all the earth in that day. There shall be one Yahweh and his name one. What a program. Now, there's something to go to bed tonight and think about. You can memorise some of those things and just think about what's going to happen in that one day. Of course, we don't say it'll be 24 hours, but it'll be a very short epoch. Brothers and sisters, and the whole world is going to be shaken to the ground, absolutely to the ground. And there's going to be a new beginning. And people are going to know that in that day, there's a man in charge in whom is entrusted the whole government. There's no committees, no subcommittees, there's no senates, House of Representatives, House of anything. The government shall be on the shoulders of one man. And no high courts anywhere will call his decisions in question. I can't wait for that day. And when you listen to your radio, you just sit there, my heart just beats and bleeds for that day where we're going to have someone to say what's going to be done and what's not going to be done, and nobody will ever question it. You know, brothers and sisters, that's what the world needs. It needs a man like that, and we're about to get him. Can't wait for that. Now look at this. This is the day. Just have a look where this common phrase is found. Not that one, but the one you'll see in a minute. In two references, a common phrase. Just note how they're all tied. They're both tied up. Where do you find it? Lord, it is come. It is done. It is done, saith the Lord Yahweh. This is the day whereof I have spoken. Now, where do we find those first lot of words, it is done? Where do we find those words? The only other place where exactly that phrase is found. Well, look at it. Look where it is. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And he gathered them together in a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. And the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and there were great voices out of the temple from heaven saying, it is done! Ezekiel 38, it's done, brothers and sisters. In Revelation chapter 16, Armageddon. It's exactly the same battle, isn't it? It's the climatic battle. And we are sitting here in this hall, when there should have been a whole lot more people sitting with us, are the living witnesses of that. We can go to the world and testify when Christ comes. We can go to the world and tell them what the apostles didn't see. We can tell them that we sat here and watched that happen. That's how excited we should be about this. If we make the kingdom, brothers and sisters, that's going to be one of the thrills that we've got, to tell people we actually were witnesses of this. We saw Putin building up the image empire. We saw him do it. We watched him do it. We're watching him now do it, brothers and sisters. We've seen Israel. We've seen Jerusalem, a burdensome stone. We are the living witnesses of that. Who would ever question the truth of what we know? We are the witnesses of the truth of it. And when I was preparing this, I've been moved beyond words, brothers and sisters. I've done this many times before, but now it's so exciting that you just think to yourself, we see all this. We have been privileged, brothers and sisters, to see that. Now here's Zechariah 12, the introduction to the new section. Just check verse 1. It becomes a burdensome stone for all people. Is in those verses 2 to 5. Verses 6 to 8. Jesus Christ returns, Israel strengthened to resist the invasion. And finally, Israel now mourns in the realisation that they'd crucified their Messiah. And that's basically the major divisions of chapter 12, brothers and sisters. But all those statements, in this day this will be done, in this day that will be done, in that day this will be done. And we've seen that 16 times in 3 chapters. It's unparalleled in any of the prophets of the Word of God that it's been put so like that. And everything that's going to happen is so exciting. It's not all destruction. Finishes up being very, very positive. So positive that the holiness of Yahweh absolutely excludes all else. All else is gone, brothers and sisters. Where minds go back, way back, to the promises made to the fathers, when Abraham came into that land for the first time, and it says in the record, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the glorious chapters of Zechariah finishes, there'll be no more the Canaanite in that day. They're gone. Abraham will step out of the grave, brothers and sisters, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. In a flash of the Spirit, will be made immortal, to be told, Abraham, there's no Canaanite here anymore. They're gone. And this city has been pervaded by the holiness of Yahweh, which excludes all else. What a day, brothers and sisters. What a wonderful day for the patriarchs, and what a wonderful day. So let's have a look at this chapter. First one starts off, the burden. So it's a burden. Actually, that word means what it says. It's a weighty matter. And it's mostly used, brothers and sisters, in a negative sense. And you can say it's negative there too. Why? Because it's going to reveal, brothers and sisters, that 2/3 of the Jewish people in the land are going to lose their life. 2/3. That's a weighty matter. How many of our ecclesia will be in the kingdom of God? You don't know and I don't know. We hope and pray, all of us, brothers and sisters. But it's a weighty matter. And Zechariah opens up a chapter that finishes on a glorious note, especially when you get to the end of chapter 14, of course, but even here, in this chapter that's got a lot of positive things in it, it doesn't come, brothers and sisters, without loss. And that's what this chapter is telling us. And so God says, right, I want to tell you something very weighty. And here's my credentials, he says. This is God's credentials for why we should believe him, brothers and sisters. They're very simple. There's just 2 things we're asked to believe. It comes up very plain. There they are. The burden of Yahweh for Israel, saith Yahweh, which stretcheth forth the heavens and lays the foundation of the earth and formeth the spirit of man within him. So here's your weighting matter. Who's telling us? Who's telling us? Yahweh. Who's he? Look up above you. Stretches out those heavens. Look under your feet. You're standing on the foundations of this earth, immovable. And he just doesn't make a man out of the dust of the ground. He forms his spirit within him. We are what we are because of God. And if we're not, then we're not of God. So we look up at the heavens. We look down at the earth. We look at ourselves. But he's not talking about our physical stature. He's talking about what goes on inside. He forms the spirit of a man. You see, Zechariah is not the only prophet that said that. Thus saith God, the Yahweh, he that created the heavens and stretched them out and spread forth the earth and that which cometh out of it, giveth breath unto the people upon it, and the spirit of them that walk thereon. More than just making a man out of the dust of the earth, brothers and sisters. It's forming in him an attitude. And God is able to perform attitudes in us, brothers and sisters, if we submit to his will. And I'll tell you something else. Paul tells us that if we don't submit to his will, he's still able to form a spirit within us which won't be to our glory or our salvation, brothers and sisters. He's capable of that. And we live in a flippant age, a very flippant age, which takes things almost casually. Casual is the name of the game today, brothers and sisters. Casual is everywhere. Humanism and casual. You just be casual. It doesn't care. It doesn't matter. All that matters is we don't hurt someone. Everything else is legal. Well, it's not. And God forms the spirit that's in men. And there's a very, very graphic lesson, brothers and sisters, in learning that. And in this chapter here, it says this. It says he forms the spirit of man within him. And that word formed is exactly the same word as when he got that dust of the earth and he created Adam out of that. That's the same word in Genesis there. That's the word he used for moulding him. But having moulded him, that man's going to live a life for good or ill. And God will be behind it. He's the one, brothers and sisters. He forms the spirit of men. We know of a man in the Bible, a young boy who went into captivity into Babylon, stood up for what was right and didn't go along with the modernism that Babylon presented to the world. And of him it was said, there was an excellent spirit in him. Who do you think put that there? And it wasn't done, brothers and sisters, by any waving of a magical wand. It doesn't happen like that. It happens because God brings influences to bear. His providential care leads people into circumstances that if they want to take it, they can make good of their life. They can seize the opportunity. And they may think that they're making progress on their own strength. And they don't understand sometimes that God's forming that spirit in them, brothers and sisters. That's what he's doing. He's forming that spirit in them. Give an example. Come back with me to Numbers chapter 16. You know the case of Numbers 16? We read it not long ago. Korah, Dathan and Abiram, brothers and sisters. What sort of a spirit was in them? Pride and ambition. Has Yahweh spoken only by you, Moses? Hasn't he spoken by us? Shouldn't we be the leaders of this group? Aren't we good enough? And that was the spirit within Korah, Dathan and Abiram. And Yahweh promised, brothers and sisters, to sweep them away from off the earth. I want you to notice the prayer of Moses to his heavenly Father to try and to ensure that God would not take away everybody who was not so guilty. Look what he said in verse 22. And this Moses, it speaks of Moses and Aaron. They fell upon their faces and said, "O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and wilt thou be wroth with all the congregation?" Do you see what he's saying, brothers and sisters? The God of the spirits of all men. In other words, we would to put it in our vernacular, if we were making that prayer to God, we would be on our faces before God and saying, "Heavenly Father, it's not all him, Phil, that did that. You know that. You're the God of the spirits of all men. You know who's right and wrong. You can see those issues clear as crystal. You know what those men said, but not everybody did that. Please." That's what they're saying, brothers and sisters, and that's what Zechariah meant. It's not just simply forming man. God has the ability, brothers and sisters, to change us for the kingdom. And if we resist that, he still knows what sort of spirit's in us. And he's the discerner of all of that. And that's how Zechariah chapter 12 opens up, because it's talking about in that day. Well, there's certain people will be there and certain people won't. And he's making sure we know that. So look up to the heavens. Look around you on the earth. And be impressed, brothers and sisters, with the magnitude of that. And know this, that there's one in charge of the universe that knows everything about us. Everything. And nothing is missed. That's what Zechariah is telling these people, the burden to Israel. So when we come back to Zechariah 12, that's how the book opens, very sternly. But also there's great hope here, brothers and sisters, there sure is. So we come back to Zechariah chapter 12, and we read this. He says here, in verse 2, "Behold, I make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all people in the siege that are about Jerusalem in that day." He says, and it's going to be, brothers and sisters, a terrible day. And it's going to be a cup of trembling. A cup of trembling. The margin says poison. The Hebrew really means reeling from intoxication. And God is telling us, brothers and sisters, and we are watching it with open eyes. And if you haven't seen it, you've been asleep. This world is as drunk as you will ever see any world that's even preceded. There's nothing preceded anything like our age. There is nothing like it. And men and governments are reeling around, stuck, stone drunk, brothers and sisters, absolutely intoxicated. They can't stand on their feet, reeling to and fro. And Yahweh says, "I'm going to send a cup of trembling into this world." This is what your sovereign Yahweh says. "Your God who defends his people. See, I have taken out of your hand the cup that made you stagger. From that cup, the goblet of my wrath, you will never drink again. I'm going to put it into the hands of your tormentors, who said to you, 'Fall prostrate, and we will walk over you.' And they made your back like the ground, like a street to be walked over." That's the NIV rendition of those verses from Isaiah. A cup of trembling, brothers. Stagger. A cup of staggering. Inebriated, you don't know what you're doing. You're acting like a fool and disgracing yourself. And Yahweh's letting you go, isn't he? And he snatched it out of Israel's hands. He says, there's a day coming and you won't drink it anymore, but your enemies will. And brothers and sisters, here it comes. Here comes the cup of trembling. And they got it in their hands today, and it's just about empty. The nations are absolutely crazy. They've gone absolutely mad. And all of that kinds of the times. But God is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another. For in the hand of Yahweh there is a cup, and the wine is red, full of mixture. And he poureth out the same. But the dregs thereof, all the wicked of the earth, shall wring them out and drink them. The dregs of them, brothers and sisters. And you've never seen a world in the condition we've got today. If Brother Thomas, Brother Roberts, even coming closer to home, Brother Peirce and others like him today, they wouldn't be able to believe what they hear and see. They'd never credit that this world could come to what it's come to at the moment. It is absolutely stark raving mad. And Yahweh's done that. He doesn't make people do wrong, brothers and sisters. God doesn't have to do that. He doesn't do it, first of all, because it's not part of him. His holiness is not made up of things like that. All he has to do is to let people free to do their own thing. Just withdraw his help. That's all. Human nature does the rest. And it's capable of horrendous results. And we are the witnesses of all that's going on in this chapter. We are absolutely the witnesses. Now in verse 3, he says, he's going to make Jerusalem a burdensome stone. Now you think about it. An immovable stone. He's going to make Jerusalem an immovable rock. The NIV says, I'm going to make Jerusalem an immovable rock. Now you think about it. Just think, and you don't need me to prove this. You're sitting there, you've read your papers, you've listened to your news. Doesn't know whether you're old or young, you've lived long enough to know, brothers and sisters, that everything that comes out of Jerusalem about the peace talks there's never, ever been a complete agreement that one section of the community has the whole of Jerusalem. It doesn't happen. And even when it was taken over by the Turks and other nations, there was always bickering from the religions, be it the Muslims, be it the Christians, and I separate Catholicism from that and make them a third because they don't even deserve that title. It doesn't matter what religious denomination you talk about, none of them can agree about that city. And we've watched that immovable rock being tried to move out the way, and everyone that's tried it, brothers and sisters, has left the site bleeding all over, cut to the ribbons, because that rock will not let them push it over, and it keeps rocking back on them, and they walk away. And you've just seen, just in the last few days, that very thing repeated again, and it's been repeated before 100 or so times. You've just seen it happen. They sit down with the Gaza Strip people, the Jewish people, the man from America, and where have they all gone? In different directions, bleeding to death, and no agreement. Until now, they're just saying, almost now in despair, never again. We want to talk about Jerusalem. And Yahweh says, I do that. I'll make Jerusalem a burdensome stone. My word, hasn't he been effective? My goodness, hasn't he been effective? Of all the words that's been spilt over that nation, hasn't that been effective, brothers and sisters? A burdensome stone. You look at Psalm 125. Have a look at this. But the day's coming when they won't move it. The day's coming, brothers and sisters, they will not move it. Look at this. In Psalm 125, they that trust in Yahweh shall be as Mount Zion, which cannot be removed, but abideth forever. Now, that's different, isn't it? No longer a burdensome stone. You know why it's no longer a burdensome stone, don't you? Because it's finally seen that you can't do anything about it. The time will come when there won't need to be any conferences. It'll be ludicrous to even suggest it, because there's a king sitting on the throne over that city. And they know full well there's no way in the world he's going to be moved. So they that trust in Yahweh shall be like Mount Zion, says this verse, which cannot be removed, but abides forever. The issue will be resolved, brothers and sisters, once and for all. And there will be no partition of Jerusalem into West Bank and East Bank. There'll be none of that. There'll be no certain places over this side and certain places over that side, this for this worship, this for that worship. There'll be nothing like that at all, brothers and sisters. It'll be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth will have anything to do with Jerusalem. I just love these chapters. I just love it, brothers and sisters, because I think we're all fed up with the indecision, the arguments, the stupidity of mankind. It's unbelievable. And to think we're going to have that man sit there in absolute supreme control. So the issue's finally resolved. It'll never again be a burdensome stone, because it's useless trying to move it. And people will realise that. It can't be done. Give up. It's all over. Now back in Zechariah, verse 3 goes on to say this. It says, and all that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. Now you see, brothers and sisters, this is a time in the earth's history. We've never seen that. We have seen Confederate armies come into the Middle East. We've seen certain nations who allied together, who fought over Jerusalem. We saw that in 1917 when General Allenby, of course, rode into the city after he drove the Turks out. We've seen nations involved. We have never, ever seen every nation on the earth involved in this. But Yahweh says the day will come. In AD 70, brothers and sisters, Israel were besieged by the Romans, just the Romans. There was nobody else there but the Romans. They didn't need anybody else. And so you go through history, you don't see anything like this. He's talking about all nations. Now you just think what you've seen, what you've witnessed. Brothers and sisters, none of us are going to be there's no excuse. We have no excuse for our behaviour. We have no excuse for not supporting the truth. We have no excuse for standing up for what's right. We have no excuse, because if anyone has ever been deluged with witness after witness after witness, we are the people that see it every day of our life. If we haven't got TV, we got the radio. If we haven't got that, we got the daily paper. It wouldn't matter if we haven't got either, then the brothers and sisters will tell us. We're all well aware of what goes on. Now, we are the witnesses of this. What sort of people should we be? What sort of an ecclesia should we be, brothers and sisters? We should try to make this hall pervaded with the holiness of God. But nothing short of that gets here. That's what we should do, because that's what's going to finish in this chapter. You see what God is doing, brothers and sisters? This is what we ought to be doing. We've never seen that. What is Ezekiel 38? We know about Ezekiel 38? Surely we know about Ezekiel 38. What does it say? It says, Gog will come, and with many other peoples with him. And when he comes, the merchants of Tarshish will bring the rest of the world, won't they? And all the other people, the religions, will all have a stake. Everybody will have a stake in Jerusalem. Putin wants it because he now supports the Orthodox Church in Russia. He wants to be like the Vladimir back in the 600s who baptised thousands in the Ukraine to make Ukraine a Christian community. That's what he wants. The Pope of Rome wants it because really he is God on earth. He really is God and the Father of everybody. The Muslims want it because there's where Muhammad took off on his horse and shot up into heaven. They all want it. It's never been a situation like that. Will that day, they will all come there, brother, all together. God will bring all those rivals into that city to make their claim. And it'll be demonstrated for once and for all that they haven't got a shred of evidence for their claim upon that city. There's one man who's stamped his ownership on that city, brothers and sisters, in his own blood. His blood was spilt on the ground in that city, and that's the stamp of his ownership. And he will make that stamp to be felt, as this chapter points out that he will. And he will become king over all the earth, and Jerusalem is his sole control, nobody else. And that's, of course, how it ought to be. Now, when we come to verse 4, just look what this says. In that day, saith Yahweh, I will smite every horse with astonishment, and his rider with madness, and I'll open mine eyes upon the house of Judah, and I will smite every horse of the people with blindness. I want you to notice how the tables get turned, brothers and sisters. Just have a look on the screen here. The tables will be turned. We read that verse. Now look at that. Here's Deuteronomy. How far back is Deuteronomy? Years back. The Lord shall cause thee, Israel, to be smitten before your enemies, and Yahweh shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart. In that day, saith Yahweh, I will smite every horse with astonishment, his rider with madness, and I will open mine eyes upon the house of smite every horse of the people with blindness. That's exactly the reverse, isn't it? And what's Deuteronomy 28 about? It's the whole history of the world, isn't it? The whole history of all the history that leads up to the establishment of the kingdom of God. But in the process of that, it was Israel that was suffering these madness, blindness and astonishment of heart. But now the tables are turned. Isn't that interesting? Exact phraseology almost in those chapters. All the people. And he says, I will open my eyes. So you see, some people get blinded. But God's eyes are always open, aren't they? He blinds people. Horse there, of course, riders and so forth. He's talking about military might. They're going to get blinded, brothers and sisters. They won't be able to see which way they're going. But the eyes of Yahweh, says the Chronicles, run to and fro throughout the earth, showing himself strong on behalf of and for him. They're never shut, brothers and sisters. But there are many people today walking around with their eyes blind. There are false views even in the brotherhood that are blinding people. Yahweh's eyes are never blind. Never, brothers and sisters. They run to and fro throughout the earth, under the eyes of him with whom we have to do, says the apostle. We ought to be aware of that, brothers and sisters. We ought to be extremely aware of that. And that's what's going to happen. Now in verse 5, we read here, and the governors of Judah shall say in their heart, the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be my strength in Yahweh of hosts, their God. Now the governors of Judah, brothers and sisters. Now that is very interesting. You know, the word actually for governor is actually a familiar friend. Now we're going to learn that there in this chapter, that when we get it all sorted out a bit later, that you'll see tonight that there are three groups, and I'll show them up on the screen later on. There are three groups that are being spoken of here. Now, here are the governors of Judah. They're supposed to be the friends of Israel. You find those terms are used in Psalm 55, Jeremiah chapter 13. And they're going to say in their heart, they're going to say this in their heart, aren't they? That Yahweh is going to be my strength. You know, it was said of Israel, brothers and sisters, in that famous Psalm 95 about their wilderness wanderings. When this statement was made, it says they do always err in their heart. They never did anything else, did they? With the exceptions, of course, but a few and far between. But in general, the nation never did anything else. They were always erring in their heart. Well, now it's going to be different. They're going to say, my strength is in Yahweh. Hooray, we got there. You see, you imagine the extremity of these people they're going to be put through to get to that point in their life. They do always err in their heart, says the psalm. They were never any different, but now it's different. Why? Because, brothers and sisters, the circumstances are going to be so different. And they're going to say that Yahweh is their strength. You turn to Joel chapter 3. Have a look at this. You know what this says in Joel chapter 3? That Yahweh is going to be their strength. I'm going the wrong way. In Joel chapter 3, we read here, brothers and sisters, in verses 16 and 17. Yahweh shall roar out of Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall shake. But Yahweh shall be the hope of his people and the strength of the children of Israel. For the first time in their history, apart from the few faithful episodes that are interspersed in a very otherwise sad record, apart from those few exceptions, brothers and sisters, it's been the reverse. But now they're actually going to say, the Jews are going to say, we're not the cleverest people in the world. We're pretty hopeless. But Yahweh will be the strength of his people. So shall ye know that I am Yahweh your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. Then shall Jerusalem be holy, and there shall be no strangers pass through her any more. All of that in that verse is mentioned in Zechariah 12. It's all epitomised in that verse. That Yahweh is dwelling in Jerusalem, it'll be safely inhabited. It's in his holy mountain, it no longer will be a burdensome stone. Jerusalem shall be holy, the holiness of Yahweh shall be there. No strangers, because the Canaanites not there. And when those circumstances exist, brothers and sisters, Israel will wake up that God was going to be their strength. And sometimes it takes a lifetime to learn that record. It takes a lifetime to learn that. We are forever scheming this, that or something else, whereby we can make our way to the kingdom of God. Brothers and sisters, give up, wake up. There's no one's going to make that apart from God. You learn that in old age, you learn that as you've never learned it in your life before. You realise, brothers and sisters, there is nothing else. There is no strength in human nature, nothing whatever. And Israel's going to realise that, and they're going to say in their heart that I am going to be for Yahweh because he's for me. Now we come to verse 6 of that chapter. In that day, brothers and sisters, Israel's going to be like a torch in a fire, in a heap of sheaves. It's going to be like a boiling pot. There's two things it's likened to. It's going to be like a boiling pot. It's going to be like a sheath, a torch in dry grass. And in that day, brothers and sisters, it says this. It says, I will make the governors of Judah like a hearth of fire among the wood, and like a torch of fire in the sheaf, and they shall devour all the people round about on the right hand and on the left, and Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place, even in Jerusalem. It's going to be inhabited in her own place, even in Jerusalem. And the inference there, the strong inference is, this is the final time, and they will never, ever, 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 ever move again. And that's the promises to David. And you know, brothers and sisters, when David received the promises, you read the record of 2 Samuel 7, if you haven't read it again, and notice this, you go back and have a look at it, what David first said to Yahweh and what he thanked him for his people, for Israel. It wasn't something that David accepted as being a personal glorification of him, brothers and sisters. He saw that Yahweh was working for his people. You go and have a look at that in your leisure. And that's what he said to God, and he thanked him for that. And he knew, brothers and sisters, what his people had been like. But he knew they were the seed of Abraham. He knew that Yahweh had sworn with an oath that Abraham would inherit the land, and that his seed would never be wiped off the earth. And David saw that as being an absolute guarantee, the strength of his life, brothers and sisters. He saw that so clearly. And he went on to say that one day that God would take them back to the land, and he went on to say this, and I quote, and they will move no more. We are the witnesses, have seen those people in the land go back for the last time, brothers and sisters. And we know that they're going to move no more. We know that better than anyone else that had this book that has gone into the article of death. They all believed it, but we are the witnesses of it. You just think, when you read these chapters, that you and I are the witnesses to the things we're reading. You think of the responsibility that rests upon our shoulders as a community of people. You think that these things that we have been privileged to live in this era of which we live, to see these things, brothers and sisters, and God doesn't expect some response from us? Think again. We are very responsible, not just simply because we know the truth. We've been witnesses to the truth in some of the most outstanding prophecies of the Bible. That Jesus said that to his own disciples, that many men had not ever seen the things they'd seen. He said, men have not seen what you've seen. Brothers and sisters, we've seen more than they saw in respect to prophecy. They had the prophecy. They saw AD 70. But brothers and sisters, we've gone beyond AD 70. We're seeing the very dawn of Jesus stepping upon the Mount of Olives, which this book's going to talk about later on. We've seen that. We've seen all these things I've been talking about tonight. That is a very, very responsible position for us to be in, brothers and sisters. So we come down to this chapter, we see what's going to happen. Now in verse 7, he's going to save the tents of Judah first. Now here are the three classes, brothers and sisters, that exist in this last drama. These are the three classes that you'll read about the tents of Judah. Now after the return from Babylon, Judah became the political term of those who returned, even though other tribes were involved. It's not true that just Judah returned. Other tribes were definitely there. We know that from the book of Ezra. So it wasn't just Judah, but they were called Judah. So that's just speaking about the Jews as a community, right? But then you get these people, the house of David. And in that Psalm 122, we read about they were to go up to Zion. Go up there, it says, to Zion, to the thrones of judgment, the thrones of the house of David. So that means the house of David denotes the rulers, the governmental powers in the nation, the high priests and so forth, and the Levites are all involved as being in the government. And then you get this group, the house of David, which will be as God. And hopefully, brothers and sisters, that's you and me. And they will be the glorified saints manifesting God as the angels did before. We'll see a little bit more of that later on. But if we get that sorted out, we know who the prophecy is being directed to. Directed to the common people in the ecclesia. It's directed to those who direct them. And finally, brothers and sisters, there's going to be another group join them very shortly in this great drama that Zechariah is talking about that goes on to another elevation again. Because that house of David shall be as God. They'll be immortal, brothers and sisters. That's who they will be. So that's who it was we were looking for these people. Now, you know, it says in that 8th verse, by the way, in that 7th verse, let's read that again. It will say the tents of Judah first. Why? That the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Judah. So you see, the house of David and the inhabitants of the city, of course, where the government would be centred, they're going to be saved second in this great drama. It's the common people first that get relief, then the government. Why? Just exactly the same reason as Jesus walking down from Mount Hermon, making his way down for the last time towards Jerusalem, with his disciples walking quietly along the road, and the Lord's heart filled with anticipation that the hour was going to come, not of his agony, but he was going to ascend to his Father. And he knew that walking behind him, they were having an argument as to who would be the greatest. And he turned to them and he was said, in essence, what he said was this: you'd like to be the greatest? Hands up who wants to be the greatest. Oh, me, Lord. Well, then you've got to better be the least. you better be the least. Ah, I see. That's what this is saying. Exactly that. So the ordinary people get first relieved. And then those who were their superiors. That nobody can say on that day that God saved me first because I was more important than you. You see how the Bible principles, be they Old Testament or New Testament, exactly the same. They're couched in different words, in different circumstances that seem to have no relevance. The principles are always exactly the same. And that verse is very, very clear as to what's going to happen, brothers and sisters. And then we read in verse 8, it says here, in that day saith Yahweh that he'll defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and he that is feeble among them that day shall be as David. And that immediately conjures up a man who was about 9 feet tall, or whatever he was. And a little youth comes out, a teenage kid, with a Shanghai. That conjures up that picture, doesn't it? You know, he's going to be among his people, and he says the feeblest of them will be like David. And they would picture up, it'd conjure up in their mind, brothers and sisters. Imagine that massive congregation of armies under Putin's command, brothers and sisters, the Gog of the land of Magog, and many people with him, all Europe chained to his heels, marching through the land, having already conquered Egypt and come back, full of the glory of this world, and at the height of his career, about to wipe this little stripling of Israel like a dirty rag off the face of the earth. 6 million people, and there wouldn't all be 6 million in that city. What would they be, brothers and sisters, against the combined might of Russia and Europe? What could they possibly do? Well, what could David possibly do against that giant? Well, they'll be like David. That's what Yahweh's telling him. You'll be like David. And then he goes on to say, and the house of David shall be as God. And you see, brothers and sisters, we take a tremendous leap here, don't we? We come now to those who are like God. And this, I suggest, and I think it's true, that they're going to be the saints. And what are they going to do? Well, it says they're going to be just like the angel of God, the angel of Yahweh who went before Israel. Here's the point, isn't it? Isn't this the point? As an angel of Yahweh before them. Well, you know what happened. Behold, I send an angel before thee. That's what it says. To keep thee in the way and to bring thee in the place which I have prepared. Beware of him. Obey his voice and provoke him not. For he will not pardon your transgressions. Why? My name is in him. He's like God. We're going to go forth, brothers and sisters, to make decisions and to give commandments. And people are going to have to listen. And if they say to us, why should we listen to you? Well, it's not me talking, it's God. You better think again. That's what happened, isn't it? And those angels, brothers and sisters, came and they were resplendent in glory. No questions were asked. And when Joshua met one just outside of Jericho, you just think of the conversation that went on. You ever read this? You ever just read it carefully? What it was actually said? Joshua looks up, he sees this marvellous creature. You know, boy, I could do with him in my army. He said, are you for us or for our enemies? The answer was, no. I'm on Yahweh's side. It wasn't a question, brothers and sisters, as whose side he was on. The question was, whose side was Joshua on? What an answer. No. I'm an angel of Yahweh. It's a question of who's on my side. These saints are going to be set forth like those angels. We won't have to command anyone to do anything in our name, because I hope we'll be in the kingdom because we got through there by our humility. I hope. Therefore, we're not going to parade ourselves, are we? Neither are we going to deny the divine prerogative in us to say this or that. It all depends whether the people want to listen or not, isn't it? We're on Yahweh's side. These angels are going to go forth in all their affliction, Isaiah says. Israel, he's talking about. In all their affliction, who was he? He was afflicted. Who was? The angel of his presence. Whose presence? God's presence. And I believe we know who that angel was. I don't think there's any question about it. It was Michael. He's the great archangel. In that sense, the first angel. He's the one, brothers and sisters, we learn from the book of Daniel. He's the one in command of Israel. Michael, your prince. So we know who that is. And he's the one that was afflicted. When they were afflicted, he was afflicted. When they were sorry, he loved them. And he took pity on them, brothers and sisters. He did. He's an archangel. He took pity on quivering humanity. And he was able to relate to that. So will we. The fact that we've got a new body, deathless, powerful, sharpened to the finest degree, will not do away, brothers and sisters, with the spirit that Yahweh has formed in us to understand that once we were weak and mortal, like those we now go out to tell what they must do and what they must not do. We'll never forget that, will we? We'll be like him. And Paul tells us, for under the angels hath he not put in subjection the world to come, whereof we speak. Well, who is the world to come put in subjection to if it's not but to the angels? We know who it is. It's you. It's me. You know, I don't know about you, brothers and sisters, but perhaps we're all different. But I know this. For some reason or other, I was born with a very vivid imagination. It frightens me to think of this. All of that I'm telling you about. When I lay on my bed, I'll sit in my study and lean back on my chair and actually think that any tick of the clock, think of that. Look at any second, you could look up and there, right behind you, would be a divine being. And you'd do what Daniel did. I will. Fall flat on your face, you'd be terrified. And you want to hear those words. I don't think, I'm not expecting to hear the words that Daniel heard. I'd love to hear something like it. Oh man, greatly beloved. If that was ever said to me, I don't think you could ever describe, brothers and sisters, the thrill that would just run through your body like an electric current. I hope something similar like that will be said. And then we will go, brothers and sisters, and we will do what Paul says in the book of Hebrews. God's not going to put the world to come in subjection to those angels, but to those who will supersede them for that great purpose of the millennium. And if you go to chapter 13 of Hebrews, or chapter 12 rather, of Hebrews, and read there, brothers and sisters, and you put the Greek together, you'll find that there's two sentences which appear apart, seems to be separate things. They're actually joined in the Greek. That there'll be the ecclesia of firstborns in high festivity with the angels. In a wonderful high festivity. A tremendous celebration. A handover of power to rule this world with Christ, under his command, of course, and with God's will within us, brothers and sisters, not our own. But imagine that, in that great, wonderful day. You're talking about fraternal gatherings. You'll never see anything like that. And all of these pictures are painted here in this book, as they are, of course, in the rest of the New Testament. And so there we go forth to be like the angels, brothers and sisters. Now we move to the last little section here, because we're going to hit in verse 9 of Zechariah. And here, brothers and sisters, we find the nations are defeated. And you see it says this, in verse 9, it shall come to pass in that day, I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. He's going to seek them. Well, surely he doesn't have to seek them. They're there, aren't they? I mean, it's just the city. It's in the navel of the earth, as Ezekiel says. It's in the centre of the world. Surely he doesn't have to seek them, does he? But you see, brothers and sisters, look what this verse says. Here's the same word for seek. Speaking of Yahweh, he shall judge the world in righteousness. He shall minister judgment to the people in uprightness. Yahweh also will be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble. And they that know thy name will put their trust in thee. For Yahweh has not forsaken them that seek thee. Sing praises to Yahweh, which dwelleth in Zion. Declare among the people his doings, when he maketh inquisition for blood. He remembereth them, he forgetteth not the cry of the humble. That's the same word for seek. I will seek to destroy all the nations. And there'll be an inquisition for blood, brothers and sisters. My word, there will be. And I can just imagine some of the things that'll be said. What are you doing here with those tanks and all your upgraded aircraft with their marvellous equipment on them? What are you doing here with your rockets and your rifles, your destructive weapons? What are you doing here with all the expertise to crush mankind under your feet? Where was all that money spent when these people in Africa were dying of starvation? What are you doing here, you religious people that back this monster from Russia, who pushed your chest out and abused children in your places of refuge where those children should have found peace and health, and they got just the opposite? What are you doing here? And he will expose, brothers and sisters, all the blood. What are you doing here? Watching these people in India starve to death in the streets. And the people in Africa tearing their hearts out. Man against man. What did you do about all that? All this blood that soaked the earth when women were running away, babes in arms. Babes were just skeletons ready to die. Women with their eyes standing out of their sockets for sheer hunger. What are you doing here with all this? Weapons of warfare to establish yourself in this world. I want to know the answer to all these questions. All that blood that's been shed is on your hands. That's the judgment that's coming, brothers and sisters. He's going to make inquisition for blood. And Israel are going to have that inquisition. And the man's going to put his hands up where wounds are still there, where blood came out. That's going to come later, isn't it? They're going to have to answer for that, brothers and sisters. And this chapter tells us that. They're not the only ones. The world's not the only ones that God's got to make inquisition for blood. Woe unto us, brothers and sisters, we've got blood on our hands. Oh, we wouldn't kill anybody. We wouldn't neglect the people starving. Perhaps not. Perhaps we wouldn't. There are other ways you can kill people. No, not physically. You can destroy them spiritually, brothers and sisters. Your ego can do that. Ego can do that. Ego's a great weapon, powerful weapon. It lifts yourself above everybody else. It's like one of these marvellous aeroplanes, isn't it? What about the people below you? What do you think about them? Where do they fit in your life? There are some people whose lives are so filled with themselves, there's no room for anybody else. There just isn't any room. Yahweh wants to know. He's going to make inquisition for blood. This slaughter of the enemy, brothers and sisters, won't be haphazard. There'll be reasons given. You may think, well, in the turmoil, how could that possibly be? He will make opportunity. Make no mistake about that. They will know. And they will know. And Yahweh says they will know. And you shall know. At the end of Ezekiel 38, you will know that I am Yahweh. Well, if they didn't have some intimation before that, how would they know? But they will know in the end, brothers and sisters, who they've been faced with. And it'll bring dreadful memories to their mind. He's going to seek to destroy them. But what about Israel? Look at the difference. Look at the, behold the goodness and severity of God. We've just seen his severity. Look at the goodness, verse 10. And I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. I'll pour it. That's taken up in the New Testament. Romans chapter 5. Have a look at it. Just have a look at this. This is what God's going to offer to his people who will be humbled, brothers and sisters, who will have to confess that they have got blood on their hands, but they know it and they're sorry for it. This is what's going to happen. He's going to pour grace and supplication. Now you know these words, brothers and sisters. You see, it says in verse 5 of Romans 5, and hope maketh not ashamed, because the love of God is shed abroad. Now many translations have that poured into. God has actually, brothers and sisters, poured his love into us. And you may think, oh yes, that's right, because I remember he did this for me and he did that for me. Well, you don't have to think what he did for you. He's going to tell you. You see, many things in our life, we can say, yes, that's the hand of God. Yes, it's indicated that God still loves me. And you feel that in your life. But you may not feel that to be a great pouring, might you? But this you will. And this is how it's done. You see, he's going to do it by the Holy Spirit. And verse 6 is going to be done like this. For when we without strength in due time, Christ died for the ungodly. Now I want you to notice the force of these words, brothers and sisters. Get the force of them. You see what he's saying? This is how it's going to be done. How does God do this? He just doesn't do it magically. You have got to be in a receptive frame of mind for that to be poured into you. He cannot pour anything into a full vessel. It's already full. That's got to be emptied. Your vessel, you've got to be emptied of self entirely. We've all got to be absolutely empty of a self entirely. And when we got to that stage, we've got to contemplate what God actually did, and their heart will be like a great earthen vessel ready to take any amount of that love that'll come. Because now we know what's happened. And what happened? Well, we didn't have any strength. We got to a time of our life when life got too big for us. We just didn't know what to do. And when we got to that, in due time, when was the due time? You see, when was the due time? According to the time. Now you ask people that question. Now I want to make the most of this verse, brothers and sisters. I want to drag everything out of here. I want you to get this. I really do. What's he talking about? What was the due time? Was it then? It was 490 days, a day for a year. Yes, of course, that was the prophecy. Christ would be born. Is that what he's talking about? No, he's not talking about that. What is he talking about? Is he talking about another prophecy that said, no. He's talking about a time, brothers and sisters, when Christ died, and the time is given for the ungodly. People might have been wicked, they might have been evil, they might have been brutal and cruel. The worst description of anyone is ungodly. That's the time. And God waited and waited and waited until Israel got to the very bottom. And Jesus said, fill up the measure of your fathers. Fill up the measure of your fathers. And God chose that time to pour his Spirit, his love, into people who could see that. And if you stood at the foot of that cross with the Roman centurion, looking up there, having seen the whole thing, understood the lead up to it, the reasons this man was condemned, and the injustice of it all. Truly, this was the Son of God. And the women, drawn to the foot of the cross, who stood afar off because the man was naked. But in the end, they came right up to him, oblivious to that, because of what was being done. For a nation, brothers and sisters, that had got to the absolute worst time of their history. That's the time that God chose to kill his son. Didn't wait for people to deserve it. If he had waited for them, brothers and sisters, we would never see eternity. There'd be no eternity. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die. You may have a brother in our meeting, upright man, a very sober, sincere man, an aged man, perhaps, brothers and sisters, and I'm certainly not describing myself, but there may be a brother you may know in your meeting like that you have a towering admiration for, brother under self-control, whose moral integrity is beyond question, who's honest, and you think, what a wonderful fellow. And you know, I suppose you might die for him. You might. but scarcely for a good man. See? Yet peradventure for a good man, some would even dare to die. Now, who's that fellow? He's not this first man, a righteous man. You might admire him, but he might be a bit not quite tender enough. He might not have a loving aspect about him. He might not be like those little pandering grandpas you see around that you just love them because they love their kids. He may not be like that, but this other brother might. And he's the brother that everybody loves because he's such a great guy, and he's just a nice fella, and he smiles at everybody, and everybody loves him. They just love him. You might die for him, but you'd have to dare to die, brothers and sisters. You'd have to take a deep breath and say, I'll do it. But it'd have to be a daring act. But God commended his love towards us while we were yet sinners. Christ died for us. And there was nothing daring about that. It was contemplated, brothers and sisters, before the world was. And if that didn't open your hearts, there's no room for the love of God. And that's what Zechariah says. I will pour into their hearts the spirit of love and supplication, of grace and supplication. Grace leads to supplication, doesn't it? When one receives the grace of God, one wants to give thanks for it. Imagine Israel, when they see that. Oh dear, oh dear. This is what Zechariah's going to finish up with here, isn't it? But I thought it was worthwhile just going through that carefully, brothers. I don't think anything I said in that was exaggerated. Was it? You could not. There's not a speaker abroad anywhere that could exaggerate that. You just can't. That is one of the most superb verses in the Bible. It is absolutely superb. And the love of God just poured, not dripped into your heart, poured into your heart, brothers and sisters. It is just incredible. So that's what's going to happen to Israel. Let's come back to Zechariah chapter 12. This is what happens. This is what's going to make the difference. Nothing else could make the difference but this. You see, verse 10 again, he says, I will pour upon the house of David. We know who they were. Inhabitants of Jerusalem, that's the common people and the government. The spirit of grace and supplication. And they shall look upon me, whom they have pierced. Look upon me. Brothers and sisters, it was Jesus Christ that was crucified, wasn't it? But you know the principle, don't you? God manifestation. See, I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. And they shall look upon me, whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him. Difference in the pronouns, isn't there? As one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is bitterness for his firstborn. Why? Why? Why do you see as him your only son and your firstborn? Because now they know who he is. He's God's son, brothers and sisters. He's his only son. They know that now by those wounds in his hands, don't they? And so they're going to see that when that man was crucified on that cross, on that dreadful day, and hung there for 6 hours, brothers and sisters, and came in the afternoon, heaven wept, brothers and sisters. Heaven wept. The sky was dark and people were terrified. The sun shouldn't go dim at the middle of the day, but it has gone dim. That was telling the people all over the world that this was something awful in the sight of God. This was not easy. And they know that now, don't they? So they know that it's not just a man, not just a righteous man that was killed. It's his only begotten that he did that to. At the time when their nation had reached the zenith of their ungodliness. That's the time. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that absolutely incredible? And you see the same principle, can't you? As he journeyed, that is, as Paul journeyed, he came near to Damascus, and suddenly there shined about him a light from heaven, and he fell to the earth and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Isn't that the same thing? He never persecuted Jesus. We have no record of Paul even knowing Jesus. There's inference in the record that he did, and I think he couldn't possibly not know him. We've got no record of a direct conflict or a meeting at all between him and Christ till after the resurrection. So he certainly wasn't persecuting Jesus, was he? But it was Jesus' people that Paul was persecuting. It was his people. And those words would have hurt Paul more than anything else. Jesus could just as easily have said to him, why do you oppose me? Why don't you wake up? Why don't you see I'm the Son of God? Can't you read your Bible properly? He could have said of any man of things, Saul, Saul, why are you cruel to my people? To me. Why are you persecuting me? And he knew that was not literally true. But he knew also what Jesus meant. Exactly what Zechariah meant. So you see, the same principle applies, brothers and sisters. And Jesus was pouring out upon him the spirit of grace and supplication. And they're not the only ones. Revelation chapter 1 and verse 7. Look at this. They're not the only ones, brothers and sisters, who will do this. In Revelation 1 and verse 7, behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, Jews, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. And you know, in the Greek, the idea is, brothers and sisters, to beat your breast in anguish. And you can imagine, can you just imagine? And it's lovely to imagine this. It's good to think like this. You use your imagination. Let it have free rein. Long as it's inside that Bible, brothers and sisters, there are no boundaries for our imagination. And I've imagined this verse. And I can just imagine the message going out to the whole world that hasn't been to Armageddon. The nations have been there, their armies, but there be people all over this world. A dreadful earthquake has taken place. Catastrophes everywhere. Millions of people dead. Not a stone building above, or a building above the ground, Ezekiel 38 says. Not one. The world is in absolute shambles. And when the message goes out that the cause of all this is by this great, some superhuman monster from space who's wrecked our globe. Who is he? He's Jesus of Nazareth. I can just imagine. Oh, no. Oh, no. Imagine the remorse, brothers and sisters. For people who may have had their opportunity to have heard that before all that happened. Won't just be Jews. There'll be dreadful moan, an awful dawn of realisation that'll blacken their soul, everybody. And they'll fall to the ground. No, no, oh no, not him. That's what'll happen. Do you want to see that? You got a vision of that in your mind? I have, brothers. I want to see that. I want to see the Jews see that. One of my greatest visions of the kingdom is to see that happen. And it's good now, of course, we see it for ourselves, isn't it? And Zechariah chapter 12, brothers and sisters, concludes with an example of such a morning for such a one. The last two verses, or verse 11 rather, we take first. In that day shall there be a great mourning in Jerusalem, as the mourning of Hadad Rimmon in the valley of Megiddon. Who was that about? That was about Josiah, wasn't it? You see, in the days of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up against the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates, and King Josiah went against him, and he slew him. That is, Pharaoh Necho slew Josiah at Megiddo when he had seen him. What a tragedy. Now you see, why does Zechariah choose that one? Well, it's obvious. Completely obvious. You see, brothers and sisters, because, look, the mourning was tremendous. The mourning was absolutely tremendous. Chronicles says, and the archers shot at King Josiah, and the king said to his servants, have me away, for I am sore wounded. His servants therefore took him out of that chariot and put him in the second chariot that he had, and they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died and was buried in one of the sepulchres of his fathers. And all Judah and Jerusalem mourned for Josiah. And Jeremiah lamented for Josiah. Look at the life that man lived. Look at the life he lived, brothers and sisters. At one stage, at the bottom of a pit, sinking in mud, he mourned for Josiah. And all the singing men and the singing women spoke of Josiah in their lamentations to this day, and made an ordinance in Israel. And behold, they are written in the... There was never a lamentation like it. It was absolutely unique in the history of the kings of Israel. Why? This is what Jeremiah said. The breath of the anointed of Yahweh was taken in their pits, of whom we said, under his shadow we shall live among the heathen. A little boy, 12 years of age, the son of a beast of a king, was nurtured by a very wise man, took over the reins of government, and in the youthfulness of that young man was a wonderful, zealous man for God, Josiah. And Jeremiah saw him as the last hope. He was the last hope. You know how long it was, brothers and sisters, before it was all over for Israel? 22 and a half years later. 22 and a half years gone. He was the last hope. And who was the problem that followed him? His 3 sons and his grandson. Jehoahaz, his son, came 5 months on the throne. Followed by Jehoiakim, 11 years. Gone. Wicked men. Followed by Jehoiachin, 3 months. Just another 3 months. Gone. Till finally Zedekiah, 11 years. Jehoahaz his son, Jehoiakim his son, Jehoiachin his grandson, Zedekiah his son. Gone! In 22 and a half years. I said, we've got all our hope in him. It was the last hope we had. There was nothing left. They could see what his family was going to be like. It was obvious, wasn't it? And Jeremiah knew that everything rested with this boy. And he's gone. And he went, brothers and sisters, by foolishness. He should never have gone at the battle. He was told not to. But he went. It's his own fault. For all that, he was a wonderful man. That's why all the mourning was for him. But he pales into insignificance against the one that came, brothers and sisters, finally to give his life, didn't he? Just pales into insignificance. So what sort of a mourning then does Zechariah describe? Well, you just think of it. This will conclude. I should have stopped a quarter of an hour ago. Pardon me, but I want to finish this chapter tonight because I want to finish this series before our time runs out this year. So in the last verse, this is what we're told. And the land shall mourn, every family apart. Now just look at the emphasis here. The family of the house of David apart, and their wives apart. The family of the house of Nathan apart, and their wives apart. The family of the house of Levi apart, and their wives apart. The family of the house of Shimei apart, and their wives apart. And the family that remain, every family apart, and their wives apart. Now you've got the royalty, and you've got the priesthood, and all the prominent families. These are the upper crust in Israel. Now, what sort of a mourning we're going to see? Well, I tell you what you will not see. You will not see another Wailing Wall. You will not see that. You go to the Wailing Wall, it's a tourist attraction. You take your camera to get a picture of it, of people publicly mourning and banging their heads against the wall in prayer, to be seen of men. So that people will see that they're very sorry. And they're a bunch, brothers and sisters, of public hypocrites performing for tourists. You won't see that this time. As a matter of fact, you imagine it is in Enfield. All our families would have separated out of this hall. You just imagine this. So we all go home, every one of our family, okay? We get home. So the family divides up. All the children go off individually, leaves mum and dad alone. And we've all got tears running down our face. We want to go and mourn somewhere. And we don't, as we normally would do, we'd say, come with me, love. I want you to kneel with me and pray with me. No, not this time. Husband and wife will go alone. And for the first time in living memory, Jews will actually be sincere You've never seen anything like that, have you? And what about these families that are important? What about them, brothers and sisters? Well, they were given and famous families. We've just read that. The house of David and the house of Levi apart. They were the two most prominent families. The house of David, David means given. He was the third son of David in Jerusalem, not this particular Nathan here, but Nathan was the third son. He was called Nathan, given of God. The house of Levi means joined, and his son Shimei was famous. So wouldn't you think these people would have the privilege of mourning? And if they didn't let the whole family go to mourning, wouldn't you think that the royalty, brothers and sisters, Prince Charles or someone and his girlfriend, wouldn't you think they've got the privilege to mourn together? But they don't want to, because they've never seen a tragedy like this. You've never seen a tragedy like this. Oh yes, Messiah's alive. Thanks be to God, they would think. We killed him. We killed him. And we killed him at a time that he came for us and waited all those years until we reached rock bottom. And we went and killed him. I'm going in there, love. You better go in here. I just want to do this thing for myself. That's what you call humility. That, brothers and sisters, are what we're going to be privileged to see. And even though we're immortal, I just wonder whether tears will run down our eyes when we see that happen. In honour and respect and remorse and deep repentance for what we do, the things we should never do. And we're all going to have to go through that process in one way or another. And we'll have no one to lean on, brothers and sisters. We just do it for ourselves. And it'll be the cleansing thing of our soul. Cleanse the soul of Israel. And from that moment on, brothers and sisters, from that moment on, it's all up. Uphill.